How's it going? It's a very sunny morning here in San Diego. Even though it's fall, the forecast is mid-90s today. That'll be fun. Today I figured I'd show you guys my other car. This is my 1971 Chevy Nova. It's got an interesting history. Before I got this car, it used to run 7 flat at Verona in the 8th mile for drag racing, and it used to pull the front left tire. It had 600 horsepower or so from a nitrous stroker, and it was a pretty hairy beast. It's not that fast anymore. The previous owner has since taken that engine out, put it in a different car, and he put in a 1992 Chevy truck 350, which is a 4-bolt main, roller ready, 1-piece rear main seal, all that goodies. But it has stock heads, it's got a very mild cam, headers, and a carburetor, and that's about it. So, yeah, this car I was able to dyno it at my old work. I used to work at JBA Speed Shop for a short time there, and I was able to put it on the rollers, and it made 224 wheel horsepower and 300 foot-pounds of torque. Now, the horsepower was pretty, a little bit weak, I'll be honest, but that comes out to about 260-ish crank horsepower, and that with that torque, which was made at 2,800 RPM, which makes this quite the stump puller. But it also happens to be the exact same figures as the Mustang from the factory, 260, 300. The difference being is that car makes that horsepower much higher in the RPM, and the torque also higher in the RPM. This car, it doesn't make as much average horsepower maybe because the power band isn't great. It wasn't running very well at the time. It might even make a little bit more horsepower now since I've bumped up the timing. But the torque is an incredibly broad torque band at low RPM, and it's just really interesting to see two different cars with exactly the same crank numbers that make power completely differently, and they have different curb weights and different gearing as well. This car has 342 rear gears, and I'll give you a little bit of a taste here. It has an 8.5-inch GM 10-bolt, and it is a posi, a limited slip. It's got upgraded axles. Everything else is pretty much stock GM stuff. You can see it's got some suspension there, and also that is not a fuel filter. Well, it is a fuel filter, but it's not for the fuel. It is the breather for the fuel cell, which I can show you guys in a minute, so nobody worry about me having a broken fuel line or anything. You might also notice that, yes, the stock gas tank is gone. It used to be here. This is where you would fill it up right here. But it's been swapped with the fuel tank, fuel cell, sorry. It's an 8-gallon fuel cell. I'm not totally sure of the brand. Eight-gallon fuel cell, and that's why I keep a can on me. This is empty, just in case you're wondering. I have run out of gas a couple times on the street and had to go down to a gas station, and that's always fun. You might also be able to tell it's got a roll cage. This car techs through a 7 flat for NHRA safety, meaning I could build this car back up to 600 plus horsepower and run 7s in the 8th mile, or potentially around 1090s in the quarter mile. And I can show you guys the interior here, if I can get my keys together. It's very dirty. I haven't driven this car in a couple months now. This is not a car that you can drive to work every day. Between no sound deadening, the interior is totally stripped. The only thing that's left is literally the stock steering column and dash with a dash pad here. No headliner at all. There are no carpets. There are small rugs that were put in here. No sound deadening. There's no back seat at all. 10-point cage all the way around here. And it is just a hoot and a half. Very loud. It's also very stiff. When I got this car, it had drag racing front suspension, which was rough. It had no front sway bar, it had skinny front tires, and it had drag radials in the back, which I still have. If anybody's interested in purchasing some very used drag radials. Wow, that's dirty. I haven't even touched this car, physically touched it, in the last probably 2 months at all. Part of that is due to the fact that my fancy Optima battery, I did leave the car sitting for a few months last year because my steering box, you can see it down there, the first one that I had in this car was the one that I got the car with, and it was out of adjustment. It was super sloppy. I knew it was bad. I wanted to get power steering anyway. It does not have power steering now. And one day it broke, actually, when I was going to leave school. Luckily, I was still in the school parking lot, and I didn't even get on the road yet. I was literally pulling out of where I was parked, and it just broke right there. Pretty crazy, but thank God that I hadn't even gotten even on the school roads yet, let alone the public roads of the freeway. And so it sat for a few months until I was trying to figure out what was going on and what to do next with it, because I wanted to do power steering and I was going to just go straight to that, but I realized that I didn't quite have enough money to do that yet. I wanted to get, I didn't want to get stock stuff. I want to get some nicer parts for it. And so I found this box from a gentleman on Facebook who, coincidentally, I found out is actually friends with my neighbor after the fact. So I've actually seen him a couple times since. He's, seen the car and everything. This is almost exactly the same box that was in it. It is a slow ratio manual steering box. Part of the reason I can't bring this to Qualcomm to do autocross or really, do a bunch of canyon driving and stuff with it, because it's very, very slow, heavy ratio. And, it kind of takes away from some of the fun of the car. You might be able to tell that I've got some front suspension. It's got Chassisworks, upper control arms and sway bar. It had Chassisworks lower control arms. I've since swapped those out for some Ridetech units, and it also has Chassisworks coilovers, double adjustable. It's got 2-inch drop spindles, Wilwood brakes, drilled and slotted rotors, 4-piston calipers. I gotta refine those a little bit as well, because I have this stock master cylinder. I'm not totally sure what size bore and such that this master cylinder has, but it is clear that it's not ideal. When I swapped the Wilwoods, it doesn't like to hold a burnout, and it won't lock up the wheels totally anymore, which it would before. Before it had some just like a Summit disc brake conversion kit, which is basically stock stuff, but good quality stuff. I was actually very surprised at the braking performance before, but I knew that I would be doing some track stuff with this car and that those would not be able to cut it. These Wilwoods should definitely be able to serve me pretty long into the future. The engine looks a lot fancier than it really is, but it does have some good parts on it. The previous owner was very smart. He actually put ARP hardware on a lot of this stuff. You can see it actually has ARP bolts here holding the water pump on, and just little things like that. The fact that he used quality parts for everything that he did do. It's got Doug's headers. Those are actually probably too nice for the engine, honestly, for the the power that it makes, but it can only help. This engine has some of the worst heads that Chevy ever put on a stock small block, which is unfortunate, but makes it, like I said, that actually helps the torque insanely. They are truck heads, and it pulls like a truck, but the whole car only weighs about 3,000 pounds with me in it, which is pretty incredible considering this is an all-steel car. It's got stock steel heavy bumpers and all that. It's just a super fun car. I'll have to charge it up before I get a drive video or show you guys how it runs. Yeah. It already had basically all these modifications done already to it, except for the 4-speed. I converted from the, it had a turbo 350 3-speed automatic before with a big converter. It was actually, everything on the car was exactly the same as when it ran 7s at Verona. I was able to swap the automatic for a Muncie M21 4-speed, which helped the performance of the car a lot. The converter that the car had before was simply too loose. It was a 3500 stall converter, which I'm sure was awesome for the old stroker engine since it made so much more power and torque. And even with the 350, this car would launch. It was hilarious to launch this thing. You could foot brake it, you know, just gas up with your foot on the brake, and the whole car would torque and load up. It would load the driveline, and it would take off like a rocket, even on the street. But, you know, now that it has a manual, the gearing's a little bit different, and it locks up totally now because, you know, a clutch obviously locks up a lot more than a torque converter, especially a racing converter like that one. That was just too much for the car. You would be cruising on the freeway, and you could tap the gas at 60 miles an hour, and you know, the car wouldn't even really move. You would let off the gas, and it would drop down about 700 RPM. I could actually put it in drive, and the car would not even barely roll. It didn't even engage that much. It was a very fun setup, but it really was holding the car back in terms of performance. But it did have one interesting party trick, and that's due to the rear suspension. This car has Calvert Engineering CalTracs traction bars, which link the spring perch on the axle itself to the front spring mount here on the frame, and it prevents axle wrap. And what it also helps do is store preload in the springs when you want to launch. So instead of having the car squat, it actually raises the car. Before, and when I gas the car and when I launch it, you can actually see this gap open up 2 to 3 inches here above the tire. And that would actually happen as well when I would foot brake it with the automatic. The whole car would jack up about this high. And it was kind of hilarious to, you know, do it next to people at lights on the street and watch them be like, what on earth? Does that car have hydraulics or something? It's making a bunch of noise, it's moving around, it's just, you know, it's a very fun car. It's got a 2.5-inch exhaust. Pretty good stuff. It's all welded. Pretty good headers. Actually, the headers have a 3-inch collector to a bit of a step down. You can see it's welded in there from 3-inch to 2.5-inch. And then it has Flowmaster 44s, Super 44s. I'm not entirely sure. They're not that loud. It's actually, I think it's quieter than the Mustang. I'm not sure if that might be due to the compression difference or the muffler difference itself, but it still sounds pretty good. And like I said, it is just a lot of fun, but it's hot. There's a hole cut in the floor for the shifter. You can see it also has a Calvert Engineering adjustable shocks. They are drag shocks, but they do have about 9 settings, so you can make them a little bit softer, a little bit harder. There is no rear sway bar. It's leaf springs. They're upgraded multi-leaf leaf springs, so they're a little bit better than stock. But, you know, it is still a little bit limited with a leaf spring car with no Watts link or panhard bar or anything to locate the rear axle. It does hold back the handling a little bit. But the wheels and tires that I have it on now are actually from 1988 Camaro IROC Z28, and they're a 16x8. They have a staggered offset but standard width for front and rear. And I have BF Goodrich G-Force Sport Comp 2 tires on it. They're a 340 tread wear, you know, high performance summer tires. Really good. I knew that I was going to be getting these wheels because they were by far the cheapest option all around for the size and the quality of a wheel that I was looking to get into. I could not afford really nice racing wheels yet. I do plan on getting maybe some very nice center lines, maybe some forge lines. I'm not entirely sure, but I can't afford either yet as it is. But they fit the car perfectly. This is without spacers or anything, and the car is actually lowered quite a bit from stock. When I first got this front suspension on here, it had the Chassisworks lower control arms paired with the uppers, and what that did, the Chassisworks control arms actually have a lower spring perch than even these arms, and these are lower themselves. You can see it's dropped down from the arm itself here. The Chassisworks ones were probably about 1.5 inches lower than that, which helps I guess, with, center of gravity and stuff like that, but the geometry of that is probably more for looks than actual performance. And when I swapped to the Ridetech arms, I instantly noticed it did raise the car about another inch, inch and a half before it would actually tuck the tire, pretty close to that on a 15-inch wheel, which actually had more tire here. It was a higher profile tire, and it would come down even further on the tire. It was pretty dramatic when I first put it on. I had the coilovers adjusted a lot lower than they are right now, and that was very, very interesting. It had about 2 inches of ground clearance at the most, and I couldn't even get out of the driveway. I had to raise it even more. But since I put these Ridetech arms on here, it's actually improved the geometry overall. They are a little bit longer than the Chassisworks control arms were, and overall it's just a huge improvement. And eventually I think I will do the upper arms to match as well. I didn't have to. The lower arm on one side did get damaged, which is why I replaced them initially, but since replacing them, I think I'll go all the way at a later time. Overall, the car is kind of caught. It's kind of caught in between this sort of pro touring, I want to autocross it in the future, kind of be a canyon car, a track race car, but it also still has a lot of drag parts still on it. The entire rear end is pure drag car right now. I also didn't mention that it has subframe connectors down there, pretty simple, which help stiffen the car up as well. They tie the front and rear subframes together. Overall, the car is a lot of fun, but it is a very rough car. It is not... It's fun for me. It might be immensely unfun for somebody else. It might make somebody else very unhappy to drive this car. But it is one of my dream cars, and I love this thing, and I intend to keep it indefinitely. I have no intention of selling it, even if somebody were to offer me the money that's in it, which is more than you'd think. Even with the rattle can paint job here, that is incredibly dirty. It's literally just spray paint. There's no clear coat left on this car. It's got rubber from years of drag racing burnouts, and just a really fun, cool car. I love the history this car has, and I love the potential that it has. I got it with a ton of work already done to the car, and it's just an incredible starting point. I hope to be able to do autocross, drag racing. I want to make it as fast as it used to be, run 10s at least. Like a 1099 is all I really want, just so I can say I have a 10-second car, right? Yeah, autocross, I want to make this thing handle. I'm actually shooting for 6th generation Corvette Z06 numbers in terms of acceleration, quarter-mile times, lateral G, maybe even top speed. We'll have to see. I've got some big plans for the engine. I'll probably explain that in a later video. I'll get a drive video together for you guys. I got to charge the battery on this. But it might also see a little bit of amateur drifting. Who knows? I've got some big plans for that. And we'll see how it works out. But yeah, that's the introduction of the Nova here. This is a car that I'll have plenty of work to do on in the future, and you'll certainly see it again. Thanks.